You're listening to Release Your Resistance with Beltran, Episode 5. Welcome to Release Your Resistance. This is Bex. The only reason why any of us don't have what we want in life is because of our own resistance. Right now, I'm learning how to recognize and release my resistance, and this podcast tells you how you can release your resistance so that you can live the exact life that you want. Every Friday, I'll tell you about a concept or person I'm following that's teaching me to release my resistance. Thanks for joining me in this conversation. Let's get started. For a while now, I've been thinking the word rude doesn't make a lot of sense. In fact, I've started noticing a few words that we seem to use all the time that may not really have the meanings or the truth that we think they have. So today, I'm going to share a few of these with you, and I'm curious if you will start to consider some words that you use, but that aren't very helpful, as nonsense. I truly do not believe that anyone sets out to be rude. Like, watch this, when I walk into that store to talk to that employee, I'm going to be totally rude. Or if the waitress comes back and she tells me that they're out of what I'm going to order, I will be so rude to her. Or my favorite thing to do on a long flight is to see how many people I can be rude to. Ridiculous, right? I really don't believe that people have those thoughts. It's nonsense. Maybe there are people like that in the world, but I am choosing to believe that they don't really exist. I choose to believe that people are caught up in their own expectations. So when those expectations aren't met, they're surprised and disappointed, and their reactions may come out bluntly or harshly or unexpectedly to the receiver of that message. So my point is, we may view others' behavior and think they shouldn't be acting that way and label that behavior as rude, or maybe even label the person as rude, but they probably wouldn't agree. Maybe after the fact, if they review how they reacted to an unexpected situation, then they might agree and say, yes, I shouldn't have said that. It was rude. I'm sorry. Or after cooling down, they might say, oh, I was being rude. I apologize. But in the heat of the moment, if they are reacting to a circumstance without thinking, without being intentional, and they probably just think that they're explaining what they want or what they thought, or they're just showing you their reaction to a situation they think shouldn't have happened. An example of this is when someone cuts off a driver in traffic. The driver didn't expect it to be cut off. Being cut off represents a threat, either a potential danger like a possible accident, or a threat of something being taken away like a place in the flow of traffic. So the driver in that moment of threat and surprise may offer the offending driver an expression of anger. Rude, right? But what does rude really mean? It's easy to come up with examples of rude behavior, like she cut in front of me, or I was talking and he interrupted to say what he wanted to say. But I can imagine when those scenarios could happen and we wouldn't label them as rude. Like, she cut in front of me in line because she didn't realize there was a line. That's not rude, maybe absent-minded. Or he interrupted me to say what he wanted to say because he was about to go through a tunnel and he wanted to make sure to say it before our connection was lost. That's not rude. Maybe that's thoughtful. So we may be able to come up with examples of rude behavior, but my suspicion is usually we're classifying things as rude as things that shouldn't be happening. We're seeing it from one perspective within the context that we know about, and we're labeling it as rude. But the person who is being rude thinks they should be acting that way, and they're looking at their own behavior from their perspective within their context. So back to the example of our driver who was cut off, she doesn't think she's being rude when she offers that expression of anger to the person who cut her off. Maybe she thinks she's showing her justified alarm at the threat that was created. Or maybe her nonverbal expression of anger is teaching the other driver that cutting people off is unacceptable behavior. In a few weeks, I'm going to do an episode for you about how all of our thoughts are optional and we can choose to keep the thoughts that are helpful and how we can replace the thoughts that aren't getting us what we want. I mentioned some of that in the Concepts That Changed My Life episode 2. But for now, from the examples I just gave about being rude in traffic, I hope you can see that thinking someone is rude is just a thought. It's not a fact because not everyone would agree that the behavior is rude. So let's think about, if there's a benefit to thinking someone is rude. What do you get when you think the thought that someone is being rude? My experience is that when I label someone as rude, I'm thinking they're threatening some resource that I think I should have, like my time or my place in traffic or my comfort, my quiet enjoyment, my turn in line, whatever. Or maybe someone's rude comment feels like a personal attack to me. And just to note, I don't mean an attack like they're coming at me with a knife. I mean the thing they said causes me to think or believe something negative about myself. I'm coming at it from a scarcity mindset. I might feel defensive or miserly because of my label of their behavior. I'm certainly not feeling open, generous, or compassionate towards them when I think of them as rude. So if labeling someone as rude results in scarcity thinking and defensive feelings, I don't see an upside. But instead, if I decide that the word rude is just a nonsense word, and I will always make my brain come up with another label when someone does something I think they shouldn't be doing, I now have the possibility of feeling curious or empathetic instead. So if someone makes a comment about my looks, instead of thinking, I'm being personally attacked and feeling defensive, I can think, that is such an out-of-place comment for her to make. Why does she even care how I look? I wonder if she's trying to get attention. Does she feel like we're not paying enough attention to her? And if someone leans on their horn near me in traffic and I think I've done nothing to deserve that attack, yes, I could think, how rude. Or I could think, that guy must have had a hard day today. Or that guy must be worried that someone's going to hit him. And then I don't feel threatened or defensive and I just go about my day. So what do you think? Does rude still make sense to you? Or do you think it's nonsense? Once I started thinking about this, I realized I consider a few other words in this same nonsense category. Another word that fits into this category for me is should. Now, there are grammar exceptions to this belief. I'm not talking about the usage when you say, if we leave the house at 8 a.m. and there's no traffic, we should get there on time. That's just using should to describe the likelihood of A following B. So that's just basically math. I'm talking more about when we use the word should to describe reality, when it doesn't describe reality. An example of this is, people should care about other people. This example is pretty vague and it can be interpreted a lot of different ways. But if this sentence is shorthand for people should care about other people, and here is an example of this not happening, then the word should is being used to describe something that is not reality. If you have examples of people not caring about each other, then the reality is, at least sometimes, people don't care about each other. And to say that they should is going against reality. I wanted to use a vague example to illustrate this in a non-threatening way, in a non-personal way first. So if you followed me through that example, let's go ahead and get personal. Can you imagine yourself thinking or saying any of these types of statements? My friend should be on time. My partner should notice how I'm feeling. My boss should explain exactly what she wants so I can do a good job. If the friend is not on time, and you think, but my friend should be on time, your thought is going against reality. My friend is not on time, but she should be, but she's not. The reality is the friend is not on time, and here you are telling yourself that she should be. She should be something that she's not? Do you see how thinking with should will lose you the argument every single time? Do you see how you are resisting reality when you think in terms of should? And what does resisting reality get you? Maybe disappointment, frustration, maybe even anger. One of my favorite scenes from one of my favorite TV shows depicts this in what I always think of as a very heartbreaking way. Some people might argue that the best television show of all time is HBO's The Wire. It is 5 seasons of dramatic commentary on different facets of society, including the criminal justice system from both the law enforcement and the perpetrator's viewpoints, unions, school systems, and the press. I could probably do a whole podcast series on how masterful this television show is, and maybe that podcast already exists and I can go listen to it. But back to this specific scene. There's a top guy in a drug gang in Baltimore called Marlo Stanfield. He walks into a neighborhood shop and in full sight of the security guard blatantly shoplifts some candy. The security guard follows him out of the store and pleads with him not to put him in this position because he's just a working guy trying to support his family, acknowledging how powerful Marlo is in the community, knowing that to challenge him could result in physical violence or even death. And Marlo tells him, "You want it to be one way? but it's the other way. Long before I ever realized that using the word should was like arguing with reality, I remember thinking about that scene and Marlo telling someone not to argue with reality. I sometimes even repeated that phrase to myself when something happened that didn't go my way. I would remember thinking, oh, I want it to be one way, but it's not that way. So interesting, right? Another way to think about should is that you could add the phrase, "That's my expectation," after each of those should statements. By having an expectation for others' behavior, you are, in effect, dictating their behavior, at least in your own mind. So, my friend should be on time. That's my expectation. So maybe you have an expectation for your friend's behavior. What happens if that expectation is met? I'm guessing you would be happy. That's cool. Except it puts your happiness under the control of your friend's punctuality. And what happens if the expectation is not met? You'd be disappointed or upset. Again, it puts your feelings under the control of your friend's arrival time because you've put an expectation on how she should behave. Here are the other examples. My partner should notice when I'm feeling down. My boss should explain how to do this project. Did you hear how those shoulds dictate others' behavior? Do you like your behavior to be dictated by other people? How do you feel about dictating someone else's behavior in order to control your emotions? Sometimes I ask that question during coaching, and the client will say, "Great, I would love to dictate everyone else's behavior." That also seems a little like arguing with reality. So if we are living in a world where we only dictate our own behavior, we can learn how our feelings don't have to be controlled by other people's behavior. By the way, our feelings are never controlled by other people's behavior. Our feelings are only ever controlled by our own thoughts about their behavior. And good news, we get to choose our thoughts. So back to the nonsense word should. I use this word as a trigger for myself. Whenever I notice I'm thinking it, or whenever I hear someone else say it, I do a little mental translation for myself. When I hear myself thinking, "She shouldn't treat me like that," I can notice if she is treating me like that and drop the should, and then decide what I want to think about her treatment. See how if I keep the should, I can't make any decision because I'm in a place of resistance. As soon as I drop the should to what is really happening, I can deal with my thoughts about what is really happening. On the flip side of these two nonsense words I've described, I have another one for you. Perfect. You may be thinking, well, that does have a universal meaning. It's describing something without a single flaw. Okay, what's a flaw? Maybe a flaw in your eyes is a beauty mark in my eyes. One day as I was planning to launch this podcast, I went on a long, meandering daydream about what would happen after launching. And of course, whenever we put something out for others to consume, there's always a chance it won't be to someone's taste or preference. I was thinking, if I talk about how my life is so much better now than it used to be, what if someone accuses me of thinking that my life is perfect, that I'm perfect? By the way, just notice how my fear popped up in this totally imaginary scenario. It even chose a heavily charged word like accused, not mentioned, not questioned. That's interesting, right? Okay, so back to the scenario. What would I do if someone accused me of thinking that my life is perfect? It made me ask myself, do I think my life is perfect? And I realized in a short answer, yes, my life is perfect. Because a perfect life has lessons. It has opportunities to grow and experiment. A life of rainbows and unicorns every day would be amazing at first, but how would I learn? What would I experiment with? How would I become stronger and more resilient? What would be interesting about that life after the first 3 days? So, am I perfect? Yes, I am perfectly human, and my life is perfect because it teaches me and it lets me grow and experiment. Perfect is no mistakes, so I know nothing about me is a mistake. The same day I had this realization, I met someone in the lobby of a building and I had a little chat. And during our conversation, I kept hearing myself saying the word perfect in response to what he was saying. Oh, you know her too? Yes, I know her. She's perfect. Oh, you're in school right now? That's perfect. You say your wife is doing great in her business? How perfect. I don't know if that word just popped up for me during that conversation because of the realization that I had had that morning, but I noticed that I kept saying perfect, and I really believed it. I do think our mutual friend is perfect. I did think it was perfect that he was in school, and it is perfect that his wife has an amazing business. And the word perfect reminds me that I can always ask myself this question: how is this perfect for me when something doesn't go as I expected? Asking this question opens my mind to possibility instead of assuming something has gone wrong. It helps me come at the situation from a place of abundance instead of feeling threatened or scarce. So what about you? Do you think you're perfect? I think you are. Is your life perfect? I'm sure it is. Okay, that is it for this episode. I just wanted to convince you that some words really are nonsense. And now I want to hear your thoughts and your reactions. Do you disagree with any of the words I think are nonsense? Do you have some nonsense words of your own? I want to hear what they are. Send me an email at hi@bexb.org or find me on social media and leave me a comment or a question. And my question for you now is, do you sometimes catch yourself thinking of the worst case scenario? In next week's episode, I'm going to tell you why, even though we are so good at coming up with a worst case scenario, we should also practice the skill of imagining a best case scenario. This is such a valuable and powerful skill, and I am curious to hear what you will think about it. And just like last week, if you are one of my favorites, meaning you're on my email list, I sent you an example of a nonsense expression in your email this week, along with this episode. I wonder if you ever use that expression. And if you're not on my list yet, make sure you join so you don't miss all the fun extras that I share with all of my favorite people. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed hearing my opinion of nonsense words. I'll talk to you next week. This has been Release Your Resistance. Thanks for listening. If you like this podcast, make sure you are subscribed and please leave me a review on iTunes. If you'd like to continue this conversation one-on-one or in real time, come visit me on my site at bexb.org to see how we can work together.